We're going to start with a prayer, then we're going to do the national anthem, so you can eat after the prayer. Right over here is Jack Butcher. We've got to speak into here. Good morning. It's my honor to be here for the third Thursday meeting that we have. Normally I'm here just for the first Thursday. I appreciate being here. Would you stand with me for a word of prayer? Father God, we thank you for this day and for allowing us to be a part of it. Today we reflect on the tomorrow, as we recognize that tomorrow is the first day of spring. Spring is our season of coming alive. Please, Father, let it be a time when this facility comes alive. There are many events scheduled. We ask your blessing on all of them as we continue to highlight activities of our wartime heroes. We ask your blessing on this meal and on the activities of this day. Thank you, Father, for your guidance and support in all that we do, for we ask it in your holy name. Amen. Amen. Would you pledge allegiance to our flag and our country? Here we are. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And Larry Head is up for our national anthem.
Feel free to join in. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Good morning again. Before we get to the announcement of the main speaker, I've got several other announcements to make. There's a gentleman that's going to talk about Robert Oppenheimer. He's an expert on it. His name's Richard Rhodes. It's next Wednesday, so it's 6 days from now at USI at 7 p.m. and it will be at Carter Hall, 7 p.m. Richard Rhodes about Oppenheimer. Now, the movie came out recently about Oppenheimer and the atom bomb, but I think you'd all be interested. Dr. Shaw, if you have any questions, stand up, Dr. Shaw. She was the head of biology at USI for about 25 years. That's the lady right there. Any questions can be directed to her. So you would enjoy that talk. It talks about Oppenheimer. I got about 7 announcements, so bear with me. The lady over there under the, his name is Stephanie Pitcher. She's taking sign-ups for any membership. We'd love to be a member of the museum. If you become a member of the museum, you can check out books for our library, 3,500 books in the library, and it's the best military library in the southwestern Indiana. That would be a benefit that you can check the books out for a short period of time, a week or actually 2 weeks to a month. I have a necklace on. This is a Rosie the Riveter. It's Rosie the Riveter Day in the United States this Friday. That's tomorrow, 2/3/21/2025. And we're going to have a person here named Lucy Wanseater. She lives on Outer Lincoln, and she is a Rosie the Riveter, or was a Rosie the Riveter, and she's going to be here for our kids tour, but you're more than welcome to come out because we're open after 12 tomorrow. If we have anyone interested in jewelry for your grandkids for a Christmas present, we have Rosie River Jewelry over there. Mrs. Rashi is helping with the bookstore and the gift shop, and she'd be glad to sell it to you. It's not a very high price. Now, if you look to the left of me, that's a license plate, and it has a pretty covered bridge on it. I have a what you call petition that I'm distributing. We're at 197 signatures. If I get it to 500 signatures, then we can get a specialty license plate. That's one of the criteria, and it's due April 1st, handing it in Indianapolis in person at that time. So if you would like to sign one of these, I've had about 30 people sign so far, but that little blue table over there, and that's Bruce Green. He's in charge of our volunteers. He'd be glad to take you as a volunteer as well, but he's going to be taking the signatures for this specialty license plate. It will cost you $25 a year until you die, or unless you call them up and say you don't want it anymore and talk to them. $25 will go to us. So your license plate automatically costs, say $100, $200. It'll be either $125 or $225. It will be a surcharge. You can write it off in your taxes. You make a bunch of money, it's a great write-off. About 50% of that will be written off. So we would like you to sign up, and then if instead of looking like, it'll have that symbol, something like that, up in your license plate. Then once a year, they will send you, the next year, 26, if we get this done, or 27, they'll send you the whole license plate. You put it on there, then you never change it. You change those stickers once a year. They will charge you. You don't give us any money. You give it to them, and then they'll give us the money. It's a way that we can have a sustainable fund. And as a museum, you need sustainable funds. So we appreciate your help. You just put money in that hat or those helmets, and that's helped us tremendously. If you look over here, we're just about to the top of the thermometer. It's a little low, but that's for Ken Wilson Archives. We're at 92,000 right now, and you've helped us each week. We put it in for that archiving. Ken Wilson was a very interesting person. He did the provenance of that plane and 6,200 planes, and we're digitizing that so the whole world will know about it. Every plane that came from Evansville, we're doing the provenance of it, and it's going to take us a year to get it done, but it will be a very great site for anybody. So if you want to do anything there, we're just about to 100,000. Once we get to 100,000, we're going to stop that. Now, what have I missed, Mr. Gross? Did I miss any announcements? Okay, he says I'm all right. I forgot. What?
A run.
5K run is going to happen on May 3rd, 2025. We have 280 people signed up right now. And so all you have to do, you can walk a mile or walk 5K or run 5K. It'll start on the runway. We had one in 2018, not anyone since. You can see the runway, and it starts out of here, and we'll start at what time? 8 o'clock? 8:30. We're 9 o'clock for the race, and it shouldn't take you too long to get down the runway and back. And you can see what a real runway looks like. You see the whole airport on, and we're closing one runway, 18. They won't land on top of you. We're closing 18 and 36, so don't worry about them landing. So we'd love to have you there, and you can sign up over there. There's a gentleman holding or somebody's holding the sign up. Okay. Oh, it's a lady. We had a hat on. It's a lady. It's Mrs. Kathy Renner. I'm sorry, I didn't notice. I couldn't tell. Okay. Kathy Renner. My apologies. Okay, she's a pretty lady. All right. Have I missed anything else? All right. In 2 weeks on the week, we're having a Professor of USI talk the first Thursday of April. That'll be, I think, April 3rd, if I got my calendar right. And he is a professor of USI. He's going to talk about the Norwegian resistance. Hitler went and captured Norway right away because he wanted all those 900 submarines running through the North Atlantic without any obstruction. So he captured them, but the Norwegians didn't like it. So he's going to talk about the Norway's underground, just like France had underground. And he's got an exhibit right back there is an exhibit already that he's given us a lot of the artifacts from that. That'll be April 3rd. On April
14 days from that, I think it's April 17th, will be a talk about the ritual. It will be the ritual of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. And we've done it yearly. But it's a very important ritual because 1.2 million soldiers have lost their lives for our country. And more than half of them are unknown, mostly because of the Civil War. So families didn't know who they were, and they lost a loved one. So the ritual is very important. 2 years ago, we had Zach Gable. Now, Mike Gable is in politics. He also teaches at Mater Dei, and it's his son. And he was stationed at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier for 2 years. And there's only about 712 people that have ever been guards at the Tomb of the Unknown. It's very prestigious, and you wear a little emblem, and you are the prima donna if you get that on you. So he was there 2 years, and he had an hour lecture for us, so we put it on YouTube, just like most of our other lectures are. So that's all for announcements. Now this young gentleman to my right, he's a, what did I miss, Mike? Gift shop. We want to go to the gift shop. We got Mrs. Rashi and Mr. Rashi over there. He doesn't know anything, but she does. So go to her, okay? If you want anything, I know you know some, I'm just kidding you, okay? But his wife's sort of helping there, and Mr. Teeman, but so ask the women if you want something, okay? What I'm saying. The brains in the world are there. I'm sorry, the men. Okay, so today is Dr. Peter Blanc. Now, Dr. Peter Blanc is a general surgeon, and we are so lucky to have him here. If you want to go learn how to fly, he's helping with the simulators. He keeps them up to date. He keeps everything. And he's just a great person for us. He's a godsend to us, and he spends a lot of time here. And these young kids are learning to fly. Over 5,000 kids have gone through our simulators in the last 3 years, and it's just a tremendous benefit. So he's been in charge of that. But we asked him to do something else today. He's going to talk about the Battle of Guadalcanal. And he will tell you how important it is. Very early in the war, the West, very early, I think 42, but he'll give you the details. But really an important battle that America was lucky to win. So he's going to talk about that, and I'll get off this. Thank you.
Okay, I should be live. Good morning, all. Thanks for coming out on this blustery March day. If you get cold, you can just imagine you're in the tropics on Guadalcanal, getting bitten by mosquitoes and eating wormy Japanese rice. Give me a minute. I have to start off with a disclaimer and an excuse. First disclaimer is I don't have any military connection apart from having several uncles who did serve in Europe in the Second War. But I'm just a guy who's kind of been interested in history for a long time, and military history in particular. The excuse is that my allergies this time of year are terrible, and I wound up having to take some Benadryl early this morning just to be able to show up. So if my voice gets raspy or if I have to start mopping my nose, that's the reason. Hopefully I'll make it through this. The topic, as you know, is the Guadalcanal Campaign. And Guadalcanal was a campaign, not a battle. It was a campaign that lasted 6 months and 2 days. And in my opinion, it was the pivotal campaign of the Pacific Theater. During the campaign, there were 7 major naval engagements. There were innumerable air engagements. Almost every day, when weather permitted, there was some type of air battle. There were many, many land battles, including 3 major Japanese assaults on the airfield, on what became Henderson Field. Now, as I'm sure you all know, Guadalcanal is not a canal, it is an island. It's Specifically, it's an island in the Solomon's Island chain. It got its name from a Spanish explorer in the 16th century by name of Pedro de Ortega Galicia, and he named it after his hometown in Spain. The island itself is about 90 miles long, about 5 miles wide, and it consists of rainforests, malarial swamps, thick grasslands, dense jungles, very steep mountains. The mountains are cut into very deep ravines by numerous rivers and streams. There's only one road on the island at the time of this campaign, and that's really more of a track than a road. And there are no bridges over the rivers. And even the grasslands were rather nasty. They consisted largely of 6 to 8 foot high kunai grass with sharp-edged leaves that could cut you and had to be hacked through with machetes. This is a picture of how the Pacific area was divided up by the U.S. military command. It was divided into the Pacific Ocean areas and the Southwest Pacific area. The Pacific Ocean area, being enormous, was divided into the North Pacific, the Central Pacific, and the South Pacific area. And then there was the Southwest Pacific area. Now, you can see Australia here, New Guinea, which is the second largest island in the world. This is the Solomon Island chain right here, and the little red arrow there is pointing to Guadalcanal. So it doesn't look like a real significant island here. This is a quote from Jack London. He wrote a series of short stories in 1911, the South Sea Tales, one of which he titled The Terrible Solomons. And about the best thing he had to say about the Solomons is that there are worse places in the world. What he failed to mention is that he left out the heat, humidity, the frequent rain. Average temperature there is just over 80 degrees year-round. And the nights can become pretty cool, which means the days can be pretty hot. It rains more than half the days of the year. There are predators, namely sharks in the ocean, crocodiles in the tidal estuaries. But far and away the worst fauna were insects, specifically mosquitoes, which carried malaria and dengue fever, and chiggers, which carried scrub typhus. Almost all of the soldiers who were there for any period of time had amoebic dysentery with, severe diarrhea. In short, it was really not a very wholesome place. And it became more and more unwholesome the longer you were there. And that was particularly true if you were either malnourished, as most of the Marines and later Army troops were, or starving, as many of the Japanese troops were. This is a little bit closer view of the Solomon Islands chain. This is the southeastern tip of New Guinea, and here is what's called the Bismarck Archipelago. Guadalcanal is at the southeastern end of the Solomon's chain, and you can see that the Solomon's Islands are arranged sort of in a parallel row with a channel running down the middle, which quickly became known as the Slot. Now, right up here is a place called Rabaul on New Britain, which it was captured by the Japanese early in late January of 1942, having been very lightly defended by Australian troops. and it became a major base for the Japanese, directing their attacks against both New Guinea and later Guadalcanal. It lies about 600 miles from Guadalcanal, but Japanese aircraft had very long ranges, so that it was just possible to make the round trip from Rabaul down to Guadalcanal and back without having to stop for fuel. So why do we even talk about this malarial hellhole of a place? Well, you have to look back at the situation that existed after the first 6 months of the war after Pearl Harbor. The first 6 months of the war for the Allies in the Pacific was an absolute disaster. Western powers had kind of looked down on the Japanese fighting ability prior to World War II. But the Japanese had won such an amazing string of quick successes in the Pacific that by late spring of 1942, the Western powers were starting to wonder, they were starting to regard the Japanese as supermen that maybe could not be beaten. The Japanese had very quickly taken, after Pearl Harbor, they had very quickly taken Hong Kong. They took Guam, which was an American possession. Wake Island held out a little bit longer, but not much. I mentioned Rabaul, which they took in late January. They attacked the Malay Peninsula here, which was British. The same day they attacked Pearl Harbor, and they very quickly made fools of the British defending the Malay Peninsula, to the point where they were ready to attack Singapore by the middle of February. And Singapore actually did fall on February the 16th. And that wound up, that resulted in about, I think, 120,000 British soldiers becoming prisoners of war. The Japanese had also launched air attacks against the Philippines, the Philippines on Luzon, the Americans on Luzon, the same day as Pearl Harbor, and later attacked the Philippines, resulting in American retreat to the peninsula of the Bataan. Bataan held out for some months, but finally fell on April the 9th, and the little island of Corregidor in Manila Bay surrendered on May 6th. By that time, MacArthur had been recalled to Australia by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Corregidor fell by the early May, and by that same time, the Japanese had also driven a joint British-Chinese army out of Burma back into India and China. That brings us up to early May, at which time the Japanese were deciding what to do next. They had essentially completed their plan of attack, their main goals in the Pacific by this time, and kind of were left wondering, well, what are we going to do now? Some Japanese historians like to say that the Japanese started to suffer from what they called victory disease or victory fever, meaning that they thought they had become rather invincible, and that the British, the The Americans, the Dutch, simply couldn't stand up to them. There were several options that the Japanese considered at this time. Admiral Yamamoto had his heart set on an attack through the Central Pacific directed towards Hawaii. The Japanese army had always regarded the Soviet Union, Russia, as their main enemy, but had gotten bogged down in a war in China that began in 1937. The Japanese Navy had considered even the possibility of invading Australia, but they required the Army for that. The Army was not willing to relinquish the required number of divisions. The also considered was a move into the Indian Ocean to try to interdict shipping into the Middle East and India. And there was concern on the part of the Western powers that Japan was going to try to link up with the Germans somewhere in the Middle East. I don't think that was ever a realistic possibility, but the Allies were really quite worried about that. In the end, the Japanese decided that they would direct their major efforts toward securing the portion of New Guinea that they had not already conquered. This was going to require taking Port Moresby, which is somewhere down here on the south coast of New Guinea, and also at the same time extend into Guadalcanal. This is some of the key events that occurred in the spring of 1942. In mid-April, there was the famous Doolittle raid on Japan. This really didn't cause much damage, but it was later felt to be a reason that the Japanese High Command approved Yamamoto's desire to attack into the Central Pacific. And eventually that resulted in the Battle of Midway. But on May 3rd, the Japanese also seized the little island of Tulagi, very close to Guadalcanal, and started to build a seaplane base there. This was of considerable concern to the Allies because this was getting very close to the sea lanes going to Australia. And it was critical to keep those sea lanes open because the US and Britain and Australia realized that Australia was going to be the staging point for an eventual attack directed against the Japanese home islands. The Japanese move into the Solomons resulted in early May in the first major carrier battle of the Pacific War, which was the Battle of the Coral Sea. At this time, the Japanese were attempting to take Port Moresby on the southern end of southern coast of New Guinea by sea, and they were thwarted by the United States Navy and had to abandon that sea attack. That was at the cost of the carrier Lexington, and also the carrier Yorktown was damaged in that battle. So it was actually tactically a Japanese victory, but a U.S. strategic success in that the Japanese wound up abandoning their plan to try to take Port Moresby by sea. Now, eventually, Yamamoto did get his wish to attack towards Hawaii through the Central Pacific. And the famous Battle of Midway was fought in early June, which resulted in a disaster for the Japanese in that they lost their four big fleet carriers during that battle. we wound up losing in Yorktown. Now, the Battle of Midway is often, considered by many to be a turning point in the Pacific War. It was certainly a game changer. It was a sentinel event, but it did not end Japanese offensive actions. The Japanese continued to plan for offensives after Midway. Specifically, they wanted to take the rest of New Guinea, and having failed to take Port Moresby by sea, they initiated an attack overland across the Owen Stanley Mountains that run down the center of New Guinea. They also had the eventual goal of They also had the eventual goal of extending through the Solomons to the Santa Cruz Islands, New Hebrides, New Caledonia, Fiji, and even Samoa. So even though they lost heavily at Midway, they were not ready to give up their offensive intentions. Now, some people retrospectively have the idea that the Battle of Midway assured the U.S. public that we were eventually going to win, but that's not true either. In fact, in late June, there was an opinion piece in the New York Times that suggested that the war was too complex to be managed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and that he needed to turn over command to a military leader. Now, the New York Times had generally been fairly friendly to FDR, so that, I think, is significant. On the very day that the Marines wound up landing on Guadalcanal, there was also published in the New York Times the result of an opinion poll, and the results of that poll showed that 64% of the respondents felt that Roosevelt in the US and Churchill in Britain needed to turn over command of the military forces to military personnel. So there was still considerable pessimism among the US populace as to the course of the war and its eventual outcome. It's easy now to look back today and think that, we were assured of victory eventually, but it was very much in doubt at this point in time. Now, the arrows in this diagram show the major sea lanes going into Australia. It's not possible for a ship to sail all the way from Hawaii to Australia. The ships have to stop at island stations, outposts to refuel. And, one of the main routes here goes through the Fijis and through New Hebrides and New Caledonia. And an extension by the Japanese into the Solomons was going to threaten those sea routes because of the long range of the aircraft that they had. And that just couldn't be, that could not be tolerated by the US military. So how did the Guadalcanal Campaign come to pass? That can really be answered with a picture. This is the guy who basically launched the Guadalcanal Campaign, and it was very much Ernest King's baby. Ernest King at this time was known as Comminge. Prior to Ernest King taking command, his position had been called Commander-in-Chief U.S. Fleet. But that got abbreviated, tended to get abbreviated to, people tended to refer to this as sink us. And Ernest King did not really want that term applied to the U.S. Navy, particularly to himself. He didn't want people going around saying, sink us, to the naval chief of naval operations and commander-in-chief of the U.S. fleet. So he changed that. Now, Ernest King was a tough guy. You know, one of the sayings is he shaved with a blowtorch. He tended to either like you or dislike you, and if he didn't like you, your career in the Navy tended to not flourish. But he was a smart guy, and he realized that the Battle of Midway had put the Japanese somewhat on the back foot. It hadn't, Japanese still had parity with U.S. naval forces, at least had parity. But losing their 4 big fleet carriers, what they called the Kido Butai, meant, at least in King's mind, that the U.S. could at least entertain the idea of some type of an offensive operation at this time. And he did not want to allow the Japanese leeway to regain the initiative. He wanted to take the initiative before the Japanese regrouped. He also, by this point in time, the U.S. had agreed to a Germany first approach, that basically we would send all our resources to Europe to defeat Germany, because they were by far and away, their economy was 10 times that of Japan. So they were the bigger long-term threat, and there's no doubt about that. But King also was concerned that if we waited for however many years it was going to take to defeat Germany, and of course Germany wasn't defeated until May of 1945, that if we allowed the Japanese that much time to reinforce all the island garrisons that they had taken, that it was going to result in a lot more loss of American lives and treasure to conquer Japan, and he was absolutely right about that. So he actually, within 2 weeks after the Battle of Midway, directed the U.S. commander, Pacific Compact commander, Admiral Nimitz in Hawaii, to start preparing for an attack on Tulagi and, quote, adjacent areas. Now, he did this without consulting the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, Ernest King, of course, was a Chief of Staff, but ordinarily major strategic decisions like this are made by the Joint Chiefs. And he initiated this operation without talking to Hap Arnold of the Army Air Corps or George Marshall, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army. Now, he also ran afoul of another guy who was in the Pacific area, Douglas MacArthur, who was commander of the Southwest Pacific area. Now, King had a big ego, but MacArthur had an ego that could blot out the sun, and it was inevitable that these two were going to butt heads over this issue. And when MacArthur learned about King's plans, he had what you might call a hissy fit. He had lobbied FDR for a joint command of the Pacific Theater. He felt that the Pacific Theater it required a joint command for effective command and control. And of course, he would be that commander. I mean, that kind of went without saying. But King recognized that FDR had always considered himself a Navy man, and felt that he would probably eventually support King in his attempts to launch an initiative in the Pacific. Now, at this time, the British were also George Marshall very much wanted to invade the European continent as early as possible, but the British realized that until air superiority could be achieved, that an invasion across the channel to mainland Europe was just not going to happen. But the U.S. Was chomping at the bit. Now, at the time of the Guadalcanal Campaign, U.S. forces had not met the Germans on the ground anywhere. U.S. forces had met the Japanese on the Philippines, Wake Island, Guam, but all of those men who fought the Japanese in those places wound up either dead or as prisoners of war. This created a bit of a dilemma for this man, George Marshall. Now, George Marshall was a chief of staff of the Army, and he was MacArthur's superior. So MacArthur was a theater commander. He was subordinate to George Marshall. But George Marshall kind of had to, keep MacArthur sort of corralled to a certain extent. And MacArthur had a lot of clout because he had been made into a hero by the U.S. public. Marshall kind of had the unenviable position of having to moderate to a certain extent between King and MacArthur. And I think in this picture he has sort of a why me sort of expression on his face. But and Marshall was not initially in favor of King's plan, but with the British dragging their feet as Marshall thought, he was eager to launch operations somewhere. And the torch landings on North Africa were not scheduled to occur until November. So he eventually decided to go along with MacArthur and basically worked out a compromise. And that compromise was that the Joint Chiefs of Staff would approve a parallel advance upon that Japanese base at Rabaul, first along the Solomons, up the Solomons chain, but then also along the New Guinea coast. Now, the initial action in the Solomons would be under the command of Ernest King. But the subsequent battles up the Solomons chain, and then the battles in New Guinea and after New Guinea would be under MacArthur's command. So, neither side was entirely happy with that arrangement, but they both agreed to it eventually. Now, at this point in time, when the Joint Chiefs approved this, nobody was talking about Guadalcanal. The concern was the seaplane base on Tulagi. But there was a coast watcher by the name of Martin Clemens on Guadalcanal who reported that Japanese construction battalions had landed on Guadalcanal. And a few days later, reconnaissance aircraft confirmed a large Japanese presence on Guadalcanal Island. And it became clear pretty soon that the Japanese were building an airfield there. Now, this really introduced a sense of urgency basically lit a fire under Ernest King because, again, an airstrip on Guadalcanal could directly threaten the sea lanes to Australia. So a plan was put together with amazing rapidity to now land a force not only on Tulagi, but also on Guadalcanal and take this airfield. And initially, King wanted that to happen on August the 1st, less than 1 month later. That did wind up getting set back a week to August the 7th. But to try to plan an operation this complex in, a month was kind of just crazy. I'm sorry, this is the whole operation toward Rapal was termed Operation Pestilence. Phase 1 was to seize Tulagi and adjacent positions. This was before they realized that the airfield was being constructed on Guadalcanal. That part of the operation was termed Operation Watchtower, but it soon became known as Operation Shoestring because of the very limited amount of planning and a very limited amount of shipping and basically limited everything that was available in the South Pacific at that point in time. And then phase 2 would be to march up the Solomon Island chain and also advance along the northern New Guinea coast, and then phase 3 eventually attack Rabaul. As it turned out, Rabaul was never attacked. It was actually bypassed eventually and neutralized with U.S. carrier raids, but it was eventually neutralized. I mentioned the Coast Watchers briefly, and these guys really, you could talk about them for an hour easily. The Royal Australian Navy in the interwar years had set up a chain of coast watchers in the Solomons and elsewhere to serve as sort of early warning system, as it were. These guys had radios, and they relied very much on the local population for support. They were, once the Japanese moved into the Solomons, they were hunted day and night by the Japanese, who would have liked nothing better than to get their hands on these guys, and the Japanese knew they were there. Now, most were Australian, but Clemens here on Guadalcanal was actually British, and he had been a colonial administrator for what was the Eastern Solomon British Protectorate before the war. And there was a constabulary of local Melanesians who worked with him or under him. This again shows the location of Rabaul, the Solomon's chain. Here's Guadalcanal. Here are a few of the coast watchers. Donald McFarland was another coast watcher on Guadalcanal, along with Hugh Mackenzie, and then Martin Clemens is in the picture over there on the right-hand side with some of his Melanesian scouts. Clemens and his scouts later served a very useful purpose in providing intelligence and reconnaissance for the Marines and for Archer Vandergrift after they invaded Guadalcanal. Okay, so Guadalcanal. The significance of the Guadalcanal campaign was multiple-fold. It became a real learning experience for both sides, especially for the U.S. Navy. Basically, U.S. Navy tactics that had been developed prior to the war were thrown out the window very, very early. But also, I mean, they learned an immense amount regarding radar capabilities, fighter direction, fleet carrier action, submarine reconnaissance and scouting. This is where the Combat Information Center became started on U.S. warships. And of course, the ground troops also learned a lot about how the Japanese fought the war. One of the most important aspects was that this was a campaign of attrition. And it was the only way the Japanese were going to be beaten, because they weren't going to give up, was through attrition. They had to be ground down. And certainly Midway was a start, but a one-day battle was not going to end the Japanese by any stretch. And this campaign over 6 months really did degrade the Japanese military capability to a huge, huge extent. It was a real battle of logistics, and both sides, Japan and the United States, were chronically short of shipping, which really hindered their ability to get troops to the island and then to keep them supplied. And it was also a battle of wills, of determination, and I think here the U.S. came out on top. The U.S. basically wound up throwing everything they had in the South Pacific into this campaign, virtually everything. And the Japanese never quite did. They put their ground troops in a rather piecemeal fashion. Partly this was due to lack of logistic support, and partly due to the fact that after aircraft were established on Guadalcanal, after U.S. aircraft were established, they could only bring men in on fast transports that could come in at night and get out before daylight to avoid getting bombed by the ground-based aircraft on Guadalcanal. But even so, there were times that the Japanese really could have committed more forces, and for whatever reason, they held back. The one point that I would like to try to get across is that this was really, really a close thing. And it was by no means assured that the Americans were going to come out on top. In the words of Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, after the Battle of Waterloo, this was the nearest run thing you ever saw in your life, is what the Duke of Wellington said of that Waterloo battle, and that could be applied to the Guadalcanal Campaign. Another important aspect, this was the first multi-domain campaign that was fought in the sea, on land, and in the air, all simultaneously, and every domain depended on the other two. Without the ground troops to protect the airfield, of course the airfield, there wouldn't have been any air capability on Guadalcanal, but without the aircraft, the Japanese would quickly gain control of the sea, and basically the ground troops would be marooned. The Navy was required to bring in reinforcements, to bring in supplies, to bring in aviation gasoline for the aircraft. So they all depended on each other. There was also a very serious lack of intelligence, and this was true for both sides, both the U.S. and the Japanese. The U.S. was relying on maps of Guadalcanal that were drawn up sometimes in the 19th century or very early 20th century. They relied on accounts from planters and prior coconut plantation overseers, some of whom proved to be highly unreliable, that they were just working from memory or making wild guesses. The Japanese had slightly better maps, but they grossly underestimated the number of U.S. troops that were on Guadalcanal. The Japanese they had known that a counterattack was coming, but they had felt all along that the U.S. would be unable to launch a major offensive operation prior to the end of 1943 at the earliest. So when they became aware of the attack on Guadalcanal, they thought, oh, this is just a raid. You know, they're there. They're going to, they're going to wreck the airfield, and then they're going to go away. They, throughout most of the time period that I'm talking about, they thought that the number of troops, U.S. troops on Guadalcanal was no more than 2,000, 2,500, where in reality the U.S. had initially landed about 10,000 men. This is what the United States Marine Corps official history said about the operation. And I mean, this is honest. It really, if somebody looked back retrospectively, if the campaign had failed, and they looked back at the forces that were available, the limited logistics, the considerable superiority of the Japanese, at least in surface naval operations, and at that time also in carrier operations, and the serious lack of training of the U.S. troops committed, they would say, well, yeah, of course, there's no way that could have worked. Of course, the story of Guadalcanal is largely the story of the 1st Marine Division, which, of course, the Guadalcanal got added to this Big Red One only after the campaign. The nickname of the 1st Marine Division was the Old Breed. And that's kind of ironic in a sense, because the average age of the soldiers in the 1st Marine Division at this time was 19 years old. Many of them had enlisted right after Pearl Harbor. The 1st Marine Division literally was the first division-sized Marine unit in existence. Prior to that time, the largest Marine unit had been a brigade. And it was the only amphibious-capable unit then available in the South Pacific, although it was woefully inadequately trained in amphibious operations at the time this campaign was launched. When they got to Guadalcanal, as I said, many of the troops had enlisted right after Pearl Harbor. They had had a couple of months of training at the most, and then they wound up spending a couple of months basically on ships being sent first to New Zealand. And then when they got to New Zealand, they realized that all of the ships for the assault had been improperly loaded. They weren't combat loaded, they were administratively loaded and had to be reloaded. There was a longshoreman strike in the harbor there at Auckland, and the Marines had to do the reloading themselves. They were not in tip-top physical condition by the time they got to Guadalcanal. They were fortunate, though, to have an excellent commander. Alexander Archer Vandegrift had been a veteran of what was called the Banana Wars. Many of the senior commanders and many of the NCOs in the 1st Marine Division had fought in the Banana Wars, Nicaragua, Haiti, Cuba. Some were even China soldiers. And that's how they got the nickname the Old Breed, because of these guys. Archer Vandegrift was a very intelligent guy. He was a shrewd judge of character and combat capability. And he really had a can-do attitude. He was well liked by the men who served under him. And he got this nickname Sonny Jim. This was applied to him by a previous senior commander who, I think it was in Haiti, had assigned him when he was a junior officer to ride on the cow catcher of a locomotive and be sort of a lookout for mines that the rebels were placing, on the railroad tracks. So he's on the cow catcher kind of looking out for what we would now call IEDs. And you'd think this, wasn't a real glamorous or desirable assignment. But he came back with a big smile and reported to his commander that, there weren't any mines and everything was hunky-dory. And after that, became known as Sonny Jim. So, the Marines land on Guadalcanal and adjacent small islands of Tulagi and even smaller islands of Gabutu and Tanambogo on August the 7th of 1942. They were initially very, very fortunate in that the weather during their approach had been poor, which basically masked their approach, so that the Japanese on the island didn't know that they were attacked until they were there and started a naval bombardment prior to the landing. The Americans had grossly overestimated the number of combat-capable Japanese on Guadalcanal. They thought there were maybe 2,000 or 2,500 combat troops on Guadalcanal. In reality, there was only a guards company of about 200 men. The rest of the men were largely Korean laborers building the airfield, construction in 2 construction battalions. And when the Americans opened fire, basically the Japanese hightailed it up into the mountains and left behind considerable stores of food, which turned out to be very convenient for the Marines. But they also left behind construction material and construction equipment like bulldozers and graders and that type of thing, which were vital in completing the airfield. Now, the Japanese reacted to the American landing very, very quickly. Even that same day, they wound up launching major air attacks directed against the Marines. They had a squadron of Betty bombers that was ready to go and bomb Port Moresby in New Guinea, and they diverted those and sent them to Guadalcanal instead. And again, on the 8th, the Japanese attacked with a sizable air attack. But the Americans were able to capture the airfield by the second day, by the end of the second day, and renamed it Henderson Field after Marine aviator Lofton Henderson, who had been killed at the Battle of Midway. This is a picture of some of the Korean laborers who were captured on Guadalcanal or who surrendered. These are frequently referred to as slave laborers, although historian Dave Holland takes exception to that and says that the Koreans, laborers, were actually considered Japanese citizens, although third-class citizens. And many of them had been drafted into the Japanese military, but some had volunteered. But they were in no way equipped to fight off a Marine landing. So this was the great prize, that this is the whole reason that the Guadalcanal Campaign occurred. And this was basically the only real estate of any real value on Guadalcanal, was this airstrip, which wasn't very long. It wasn't paved. It didn't even initially have Marston steel matting. It was a pretty crappy little airfield. And there were many, many operational losses of aircraft trying to take off or land from this, particularly after it had been shelled and bombed repeatedly by the Japanese. But as long as the Marines could hold that airfield, it offered the potential for air support. The problem is they didn't have any aircraft available initially when they took the airfield, and they didn't become available for not quite 2 weeks. And during that period of time, the Marines had no way of fighting back against the incessant Japanese air attacks, which occurred almost daily. Even Japanese submarines were surfacing and shelling the Henderson field area, because there was no way to fight them off. So this was an uncomfortable time for the troops on Guadalcanal. This guy was not slow to get off the dime either. He commanded a cruiser division stationed at Rabaul. And Admiral Makawa basically became the architect of what is known as the worst U.S. naval disaster in the history of the U.S. Navy, which was the Battle of Savo Island. Makawa heard about the invasion of Guadalcanal pretty early on August the 7th, and within 2.5 hours he was planning a cruiser attack on the transports there at Guadalcanal. By the morning of August 8th, he was on his way to Guadalcanal with 5 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and a destroyer. Now, his problem was he had no air support. He planned a night attack because he knew that there were American carriers somewhere nearby. American carrier aircraft had been fighting off these Japanese air attacks on Guadalcanal. They knew the carriers were somewhere. He didn't know exactly where. But he had to figure that when daylight came, they'd be out hunting for him. So he planned to steam down the slot and attack the U.S. fleet and get out of Dodge basically before sunup. Now, he was counting on the Japanese proficiency in night fighting. The Japanese Navy had invested a lot of training in night fighting. They also had an excellent torpedo in the Type 93, so-called long lance torpedo. At this time, our torpedoes were grossly inferior and they usually didn't work. The Japanese had really worked on destroyer torpedo attacks, and they actually considered the destroyer and the torpedo to be the most important attack element in their cruiser fleet. The Battle of Savo Island was really a comedy of errors for the U.S. The cryptanalysts, the code breakers, actually intercepted Makawa's orders to the fleet on August the 7th. Unfortunately, they didn't decode it until August 21st, I think it was. The fleet, Makawa's fleet, was repeatedly observed by reconnaissance Air Force, but the type of ships was misidentified, and the communication was so bad that the people who needed to know this, namely Jack Fletcher, the carrier commander, and Richmond Kelly Turner, who was at that time commanding the amphibious naval forces, they didn't get the message until after the attack took place. There was even a submarine that the fleet went right over while it was submerged, and they correctly assessed not only the types of ships that passed over them, but their direction. And this information did get back to Richmond Kelly Turner, but Kelly Turner kind of dismissed it. The fleet was again subsequently detected, but misidentified as having, instead of heavy cruisers, seaplane tenders. Now, seaplane tenders would not have had the speed or ability to get down to Guadalcanal to do any damage. Kelly Turner deduced that the Japanese intent was to create a seaplane base in the shortened islands. So there were warnings. Unfortunately, the information either didn't get correctly passed or was misinterpreted. The result was that Macau was able to steam into south of Savo Island undetected, where within a period of 7 minutes, he mortally damaged an Australian cruiser, the Canberra, and severely damaged the USS Chicago heavy cruiser. Then he swung north and in very rapid succession sunk 3 US heavy cruisers, the Vincennes, the Quincy, and the Astoria. There were huge number of errors made by the US Navy during this attack, but the result was that the US surface fleet protecting the transports was eviscerated. Now, luckily for the US, Macau did not continue on to destroy the transports. Had he done so, the 1st Marine Division almost certainly would have been stranded and forced to surrender. There was no air cover available at that time. Jack Fletcher had actually decided by that time that he was going to withdraw his carriers, which was a very questionable decision on his part, but even had he not, he would not have been able to protect the surface fleet during the night. So there would have been nothing to prevent the Japanese from coming back down the next night and sinking the transports had they remained there. So there was basically no choice at that point but to withdraw the transports. Bad as the loss of the cruisers was, the loss of the transports would have been arguably worse. They were irreplaceable. There wasn't enough shipping available to begin with, and losing those transports would have been catastrophic. But when the transports withdrew after the battle the next day, they took with them some Marines that had not yet been landed, but much food and medical supplies and ammunition of all types. At this point in time, of course, the Marines felt that they had been abandoned. And I'm sure a lot of them were thinking that, wondering if they were going to be hung out to dry, sort of like the guys on Wake Island and Bataan and Corregidor had been. Fortunately, this is a picture of the USS Chicago heavy cruiser after it had been hit in the bow by a Type 93 Japanese torpedo. So on August 9th, the transports get out of Dodge, so to speak, leaving the ground forces on their own. Fortunately, with the help of the captured Japanese construction equipment, they were able to complete the airfield to the point where the first plane could land on it on August 12th. This, I think, was a Catalina flown by the aid of Slim McCain, John McCain's grandfather, who was at that time commander of the local air forces. His aide declared the airfield operational. Unfortunately, it was about another week before there were actually any planes available to be stationed there. But on August the 20th, the first aviators, and these were all Marine aviators, landed on Henderson Field, consisting of a squadron of fighters, VMF 223, and strike aircraft, basically dauntless bombers, VMSB 222. And this became what became known as the Cactus Air Force. Cactus having been the code name for Guadalcanal prior to the invasion. And, you know, I could talk about the Cactus Air Force for an hour or more, but these guys were pretty amazing aviators. They were flying primarily F-4F Grumman Wildcats, shown here. I think this looks like a P-38. If it is, this would have been taken later because they didn't have any P-38s available on the island until I think sometime in October, and then only for a short period of time because they had been loaned by MacArthur. But even though the F-4F Wildcat was considered greatly inferior to the Japanese Zero, these guys more than held their own against the Japanese fighters. I'll try to speed it up here a little bit. This is just Marines in the chow line. At this point in time, the U.S. Navy was having a difficult time supplying these guys, and they were subsisting largely on Japanese stores, which consisted of wormy rice and weevil-infested oats. According to an interview I heard from Sid Phillips in the 1st Marines, they were getting 2 meals a day, and for a while they consisted of 2 tablespoons of rice, and that was it. So these guys became quickly pretty severely malnourished. Now, this character is a guy by the name of Colonel Chiki. He commanded what was called the Chiki Detachment. These guys were earmarked to invade Midway Island had the Battle of Midway gone better for the Japanese. And this was the attachment that was most immediately available to launch a ground attack against the Marines on Guadalcanal. And this was done on August 20th, the night of 20th and 21st, resulting in what has been called the Battle of the Tenaroo, or the Battle of Alligator Creek. In reality, it was the river involved was the Elu. But Achiki, although his entire detachment consisted of about 2,400 men, his initial attack was made with only the first 900, and he declined to wait for the rest of his guys to show up. He was a pretty arrogant guy, like many military commanders were, and he had a pretty low opinion of the fighting ability of U.S. troops. This is from an Imperial Japanese Army training manual, and you could read what it says there, but as you can see, they didn't think much of the American fighting ability. Nor did they think much about the Americans on the home front. Now, at this time, the Chiki thought there were maybe only 2,000, 2,500 combat troops, U.S. combat troops available on the island. He thought that he would be able to punch through with his relatively small force of 900. He was proved wrong. He attacked directly across the mouth of the sandbar at the mouth of the Elu River, or Alligator Creek, and his men were basically mowed down by 30 caliber and 50 caliber machine guns, 37 millimeter anti-tank guns firing canister, and 81 millimeter mortars. And he had left about 100 of his guys back at the landing point east of the airfield, and nearly all of the remaining 800 were killed in this battle. This is a close-up of some of the dead Japanese after the battle. Richard Frank is a noted historian, Guadalcanal historian, and he refers to this battle as the most important small battle of the Pacific Campaign. This really set the tone for subsequent fighting in the South Pacific. The Japanese demonstrated an unwillingness to surrender. There were many surrender ruses in which a Japanese soldier pretended to be injured and then when offered aid would kill the person who was trying to render assistance to him. But it also demonstrated to the Marines that they could win, they could beat the Japanese, and they restored their confidence in their tactics and in their weaponry. So this is the Battle of the Teru occurred here August 20th to 21st. There was a big carrier battle on August 24th, which was considered a U.S. victory. And then a little bit later, the remainder of the Achiki detachment was landed. And there was a subsequent attempt the next attempt by the Japanese to take Henderson Field was under the command of this guy, General Kawaguchi. He wound up having a force at his disposal of about 3,000 men and also the remainder of that Achiki detachment of 1,500 men. He landed basically his troops in the first week in September. He landed east of Henderson Field. His attack was somewhat forestalled by a Marine raider and amphibious assault at his landing point, and this was under the command of Merritt Edson. And through this attack, it was found that the Japanese had landed a considerable force, and they were also army troops because the previous troops had been Japanese special landing forces, naval special landing brigades. Kawaguchi launched an attack on what was then known as Bloody Ridge, which is a ridge directly south of Henderson Field. The 1st Raider Battalion was under the command of this fellow, Merritt Edson. He also commanded the 1st Marine Parachute Battalion. And he, through his leadership and the leadership of some others, with the incredible assistance of the 11th Marine Battalion, which was the Marine artillery, was able to fight off this attack on Henderson Field. This shows Bloody Ridge, which after the battle became known as Edson's Ridge. It's a ridge surrounded by dense jungle that points directly at the airfield. And Kawaguchi's plan was to attack primarily from the south, but he also made arrangements for flanking attacks from both flanks, but found it very, very difficult to traverse the dense jungle and get set up, and the communications were very poor. He couldn't coordinate his attack. One of his 3 main battalions in the attack force never got into action, which contributed to his loss. This is just a picture of Bloody Ridge facing north towards the airfield. Dense jungle on both sides. The ridge itself consists primarily of coral covered with only maybe a foot of topsoil, so it was impossible to dig proper foxholes. This was probably as close as the Japanese came to taking Henderson Field in a ground operation, and it was very, very close. There's a lot more to the Guadalcanal Campaign that obviously I can't talk about because time doesn't permit. This is just a summary of the losses for Japan and U.S. You can see that the loss in warships was comparable, although the U.S. lost many more sailors. And it has to be pointed out that for every person, for every ground troop that was KIA, there were almost 3 U.S. Navy sailors who were killed during that campaign. The aircraft losses were substantially higher for the Japanese than the U.S., but perhaps more importantly was the huge loss in experienced aircrew that the Japanese suffered. And there was no comparison to the total number of KIA among the ground troops. The Japanese lost well over 25,000 ground troops, most due to disease or starvation. And this is to just summarize what the Guadalcanal Campaign accomplished. Ernest King's big gamble, and it was a big gamble, did pay off. It gutted Japan's carrier force and initiated the decisive campaign of the Pacific War. It started the campaign of attrition, which was going to be necessary to defeat Japan months earlier than otherwise would have happened. And it halted Japanese offensives in the Central Pacific and their intended further expansion in the South Pacific into New Caledonia, Fiji, and Samoa, preserved the security of sea lanes to Australia, defeated Admiral Yamamoto's grasp for a negotiated end of the war, and also because of the duplication of Japan's effort to try to, in both New Guinea and Guadalcanal, it contributed to Japan's ultimate failure in New Guinea. So with that, I'll draw to a close and see if there's time to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Peter. It's very extensive, very detailed. I'm sure all of you like that. So we got microphones placed around the room. So this is one of the most important parts. It's a share part where we get comments from the audience. So we'd like to have you ask some questions. Raise your hands if you would. If you have any questions, I will start the first one. If you just think of why they think Hitler lost in Europe, he went on two fronts. He went to Russia and he also was fighting England. That's one of these major mistakes. This could have been caught if the United States would have sent everything to Guadalcanal and out west at the same time, but we decided what Peter said is not do that. But if you look at the chain of supplies all the way to Guadalcanal from the United States, that's a big chain, where if you look at the chain to Stalingrad and Moscow, it was all on land, a little easier, but it's still a lot of extensive supply chain. Okay, we got this is a Marine Corps guy, so announce your name and everything else.
Dr. Great presentation. I missed, Guadalcanal was 90 miles long, and how wide did
About 25 miles wide, and it was, the Sea Lock Channel between Tulagi and Guadalcanal was only 25 miles. It was fairly constricted water.
Thank you.
We had a gentleman talk here, Mr. Colodi, he's still living, he lives down in Slaughter's, Kentucky. He talked about the attack of the Solomon Islands that followed this, and it took him forever to island hopped all the way to Rahu, or tried to get to Rahu. But he talked about that extensively. It was about 2 years ago. If you want to look on YouTube, we have him on there. He was a Marine Corps support for their pilots. Any other questions here in the crowd? Okay, we got another one there. All right, if you look at those statistics, they're really similar to Iwo Jima, the death rate. Here we got another one here. David Coker is going to ask a question. Take your time. His question will be about an hour long. Anyway, he's a smart cat. If you look at those statistics, very similar to Iwo Jima death rate for the Japanese and the Americans. So if this is one of the first part of the war, and what Peter said, I don't know how those guys survived, but it sort of held tight for 6 months on that island without many supplies. Okay, David Coker, he's a writer, he's given us many talks here, expert on Chrysler, expert on car industry that started Chrysler and everything. Stand up and talk, ask. Stand up. David Coker.
I just wanted to make one comment. You said that the Japanese could not afford to deploy enormous amounts of troops to this area. And the main reason was because they still had 1 million men occupying Japan. And something that we don't really hear very much about these days, but the Japanese killed over 17 million people in China. Over 90% of them civilians, while all this was going on.
And that's a very important point. If you look, we've got a whole display on the hump. If you look at the hump, it was bringing supplies from India over to China. And that was the biggest airlift ever until the Berlin airlift. But United States, some comments say there's as many as 80% of troops of the Japanese Empire that were stationed in China. And we kept helping China to try to keep those ground forces there. So a lot of ground forces couldn't be taken to other places. If you look at the death rate in World War II, the death rate in China was close to, he said 17 million, but people say 20 to 25 million. And also, if you go look at Russia, it's about the same amount. Look at Lithuania, it's very high for the population. Lithuania lost 19% of its population in World War II. Russia lost 13%. China lost 5% of their population in World War II. But the Japanese had guns. The Chinese had nothing but swords. They just shot at will. And when Doolittle landed in a town, the Chinese helped him, and they killed everybody in that town, 150 to 200,000 for helping Doolittle exit there. But they were not on that topic. But the Solomon Islands, these guys were, I say, these Marines were actually tough. And he didn't talk to, if you read about that, there's so many snakes over there. There's water snakes, there's poison snakes, there's everything. God's elements will destroy you in these islands, not just bullets.
Yeah, it was a fight against nature as much as anything, for the guys there.
If you just look at war, look at World War I. 65,000 out of the 110,000 troops in the United States were killed by that virus, the flu virus. And over here, the elements will beat you as much as the bullets, and so it's very treacherous what you show.
Bad as it was for the Marines, it was even worse for the Japanese. The Japanese had a nasty tendency of putting their men on places where they could not keep them supplied. And as a result, they wound up many of them starving to death. The Japanese did evacuate their guys from Guadalcanal. They took off about, I think, 10,600 very successfully in early February. But of those 10,600, 600 died shortly after being evacuated, and another 3,000 required extensive hospitalization because they were so debilitated.
Another question. Say your name, please.
Hi, I'm Mark Effinger. How are you doing today? Great speech and real learning experience for me.
He's only 30 years in Navy, Master Chief, United States Navy. Give him applause.
You're all very worth it. The supply chain really interests me. Did we start taking over civilian ships already to help supply Guadalcanal?
There were what were called yippies, yard patrol ships, and some of those, I understand, were California tuna fishing boats that had been basically drafted into the Navy along with their crews. There were what used to be civilian boats operating there, and the yippies. They served a very useful purpose, I understand, in ferrying supplies back and forth from Tulagi to Guadalcanal. Tulagi had an excellent harbor. Guadalcanal did not. There were no piers, there was no, established harbor. So a lot of supplies wound up getting landed at Tulagi and then ferried over by the smaller ships. So,
if you just look at supply line like you're talking about, it's a logistical nightmare for us to bring goods from the United States to Japan to beat them. I mean, that Pacific Ocean is not little, and you had to have ships, food, gasoline, everything, and guns and people. How we ever did that, I'll never know. It's just absolutely amazing. Just the logistics at that time. And Magellan went all the way around the world, but this, for us to have the Navy go and win out west, this was just a microcosm of what they sent over to Okinawa, Philippines, Iwo Jima, and we lost a lot of troops in those areas. Other questions? All right, Peter, it's very in-depth. I don't think anybody got anything as in-depth as you just did, but thank you very much. What we forget? Oh, if you want to come up next talk, please sign up as you exit, then we don't have to call you. If you just use email if you can. If you don't know how to use email, then just call, okay? But sign up for the next visit so we can get the lunch number right. That's my boss. She's the admiral at the house. Thank you very much for coming.